German pilots laughed at the P-47 until its 8.50s spoke. April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet over Cannes, France. Through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5, Oberleutnant, First Lieutenant, Ralph Hermican watched a strange sight below, a tight formation of heavy American fighters clawing their way up toward him. He couldn't hide his smirk behind his oxygen mask. "They've sent flying milk bottles," he radioed to his wingman, laughing at the huge Republic P-47 Thunderbolts struggling to gain altitude. 16 P-47C fighters from the U.S. 4th Fighter Group were indeed climbing hard, their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines hauling nearly 7 tons apiece into thin air. To German pilots used to sleek, quick-climbing opponents, these big Americans looked ridiculous. Barrel-shaped fuselages, greenhouse canopies, short-looking wings, and enormous propellers. What Hermican and the other Luftwaffe pilots circling like wolves didn't realize was that they were looking at the machine that would break the German fighter force. In 18 months, the milk bottles would go from a joke to a nightmare. The reason? 8 synchronized .50 caliber Browning machine guns, 3,400 rounds on board, a combined rate of fire around 6,000 rounds per minute, and enough concentrated lead to saw a fighter in half in under 2 seconds when properly set to converge. That April morning, Major Donald Blakesley, commander of the 335th Fighter Squadron, a former RAF Eagle Squadron ace who'd only just left his Spitfire, spotted the Germans. He already understood what many of his men did not. To live in a P-47, you had to fight differently. The Thunderbolt wasn't designed to win pretty turning duels. It was built to hit like a hammer, at high altitude, at high speed, with overwhelming firepower. A dinosaur that rewrote the rulebook. The P-47 was born from a June 1940 panic when German fighters blew through France. Alexander Kartveli, Republic's Georgian-born chief designer, was asked for a high-altitude interceptor to match the best the Luftwaffe had. What he delivered wasn't a featherweight-turned fighter, it was a monster with brains. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli told his team, "but with good proportions." The XP-47B flew May 6, 1941, and shocked everyone. Empty, it weighed nearly 10,000 pounds, about 65% heavier than its predecessor. A giant turbo-supercharger ran through the rear fuselage like plumbing in a submarine, giving the plane a pregnant look. Test pilots asked, half-joking, "Does this thing really fly?" It did, and at altitude it flew like nothing else. The R-2800 could hold full power at 27,000 feet, where many opponents could barely breathe. The exhaust-driven turbo gave sea-level punch in the stratosphere, where ordinary superchargers faded. At first, even U.S. pilots hated it. Under Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zenke, the 56th Fighter Group lost men and airplanes in training, ground loops, torque rolls, and terrifying dives that hit compressibility, the controls stiffening as shock waves formed on the wings. But those who mastered it discovered something new. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive, remembered Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of Oklahoma, later a 27 victory ace. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. Early fights, proof for the mockers. In May 1943, the P-47 seemed to confirm German prejudice. It couldn't outturn a Focke-Wulf 190, couldn't outclimb a Messerschmitt Bf 109 at medium heights, and felt clumsy in classic dogfights. German units quickly worked out tactics. Attack from below, forced turning fights, punished the big American in the vertical where it was sluggish early in a climb. Hauptmann Joseph Pips Priller of Jagerschwader 26 jeered after his first look. "It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, climbs like a pregnant cow." U.S. losses were painful in the first weeks. RAF observers even joked that the best escape maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around inside the roomy cockpit. But the German intel office missed two things. The P-47 soaked up punishment. One Thunderbolt came home on May 4 with 21 cannon hits and over 100 machine gun strikes. A liquid-cooled fighter would have died after the first cuts to its radiator. The radial R-2800 just kept grinding. When a P-47 got guns on target, airplanes didn't just fall, they came apart. 8 Brownings converged into a tight kill zone. And unlike cannon with tiny ammo counts, the P-47's guns could fire over 30 seconds, an eternity in air combat. Johnson's impossible return, June 26, 1943. The turning point in attitudes began over l'Isle-la-Forêt/Abbeville on June 26, 1943. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st FS was bounced by JG-26, 16 FW-190s led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Watz Galland, brother of Adolf Galland. Johnson's P-47 was savagely hit. Canopy shattered, hydraulics sprayed the cockpit, a cowling torn open, fire behind the panel, and shrapnel in his face and leg. He tried to bail out. The canopy was jammed by a 20mm burst in the rail. Trapped at 27,000 feet in what should have been a dying airplane, he leveled off and pointed at England blind through oil. Then it got worse. A lone FW-190 slid in behind him and emptied its cannons and machine guns into the Thunderbolt. Everything the German had went into Johnson's wreck. Still it flew. The German pilot finally pulled alongside, stared wide-eyed at the bullet-riddled P-47, saluted and left, likely out of ammo. Johnson bellied in at Manston. Ground crews stopped counting holes at 200. 3 of 4 main fuselage longerons were shot through. The engine had taken direct hits. A cannon shell had burst inches from his head. Yet the airplane brought him home. U.S. engineers realized they'd underestimated their own machine. German intelligence at first refused to believe the reports, until multiple pilots confirmed the Thunderbolt could take everything and still fly. The new playbook: boom, zoom, and erase. By July 1943, U.S. pilots were learning the right way to fight a P-47. Zenke hammered a simple rule: don't turn with them. Don't low climb with them. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. In a dive, a Thunderbolt was a falling anvil. From 30,000 feet it could hit 550 miles per hour, faster than German fighters could safely attain. That speed converted into a zoom climb the enemy couldn't match. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin led the way with what pilots nicknamed the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Climb high, roll inverted, dive like a meteor, fire a short, devastating burst, then climb back out before anyone could answer. Surviving Luftwaffe pilots called it hitting a wall of lead. The lesson was hammered home during the Schweinfurt-Regensburg shuttle mission on August 17, 1943, the deepest bomber strike so far. Major David Schilling and his 62nd FS pounced on Bf-110 bomber destroyers setting up to rip apart the B-17s. In seconds, the heavy twins disintegrated under the mast .50s. Where German cannon offered short, precise bursts, American .50s delivered long, overlapping streams that cut airplanes to pieces. Convergence mattered. With 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 total, set to meet around 300 yards, all 8 streams merged into a rough 6-foot circle. At that distance, a 2-second burst poured hundreds of half-inch projectiles at nearly 2,900 feet per second. Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski put it bluntly: hit with all 8 and the airplane doesn't just go down, it explodes. Altitude was the Thunderbolt's kingdom. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe learned another hard truth: the P-47 got better the higher it went. The turbo-supercharged R-2800 kept its muscle above 30,000 feet, while German engines with mechanical superchargers faded above 25,000. On October 8, 1943, Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's great aces with 206 victories, was leading Jagerschwader 1 against a high B-17 stream when 56th FG Thunderbolts dived from 32,000. Robert Johnson, now combat-seasoned, fired at 300 yards with a 30-degree deflection. The FW-190 exploded. If a star like Philipp could be swept away at altitude, what chance did average pilots have? A report to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in late 1943 was grim. The P-47 had a service ceiling beyond 42,000 feet, near-sonic dive speeds, heavy armor, steel behind the pilot, thick bullet-resistant glass, shielding around the engine, and astonishing durability. Shooting one down is extremely difficult. The paddle blade leap. In January 1944, the P-47D-22 arrived with a massive 13-foot Hamilton Standard hydromatic paddle blade propeller. Climb jumped from about 2,200 to 3,000 feet per minute at sea level, acceleration improved, and the airplane bit the air harder. German veterans noticed immediately. Heinz Nock of JG-11 wrote that the fat Americans had learned to climb, and were now keeping up to 30,000. Pilots who expected to simply pull away found themselves caught and blown apart. The new prop also changed the sound. At high power the blade tips neared supersonic speed, creating a deep, rolling thunder German troops could recognize from miles away. They nicknamed it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, with dropped tanks, Thunderbolts could escort deep into Germany. The Luftwaffe tried to punch through to the bombers anyway, and paid. Even as the P-51 Mustang took over the longest escorts, the P-47 moved into a new role where it became utterly terrifying. The most feared fighter bomber. As the Allies prepared for D-Day, P-47 groups pivoted hard into ground attack. The 8.50s that shredded fighters also chewed through trucks, locomotives, and thin armor. Then came bombs and rockets. A P-47D-25 could carry two 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pound bomb on the belly, a bomb load like an early war medium bomber. Later versions added up to 10 5-inch HVR rockets, each like a 105mm artillery shell. German soldiers learned to fear the low, roaring approach, the scream of rockets, and the hammering .50s. One Panzer Grenadier officer at Normandy described a truck column vanishing in a single pass. The psychological effect was severe. The Germans' nickname, J-bows, fighter bombers, didn't fully capture it. These were flying artillery with sniper accuracy. June 6, 1944, D-Day. More than 500 P-47s stacked from sea level to the stratosphere formed an air umbrella over the beaches. Few German fighters even made it to the invasion coast. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jägerschwader II was one of only 3 who reached the beachhead. The sky belonged to the Americans. 12 of us left at dawn. I was the only one to return. 4 weeks after, P-47s choked German movement by day. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of locomotives, thousands of trucks and vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced onto night roads, strangling its ability to respond. The Pacific learns the same lesson. At the same time, the P-47 was proving itself in the Pacific. The 348 Fighter Group discovered the Thunderbolt's range, toughness, and firepower fit the theater perfectly. Colonel Neil Kirby famously attacked a huge Japanese formation over Wewak on October 11, 1943, shooting down 6 in one mission and earning the Medal of Honor. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai later wrote, "We called them monsters. I put many 20mm rounds into one and watched it fly away. Their return fire tore planes apart." The P-47N, with big wet wings carrying extra fuel, pushed range to over 2,300 miles, escorting B-29s toward Japan. Even jets could be caught. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, one of America's great fighter leaders, nailed a Me-262 by using a high-altitude dive to build speed and then opening fire at about 400 yards. The jet came apart under the .50s. Late-war P-47M variants, with water methanol injection boosting the R-2800 toward 2,800 horsepower, could hit 470 miles per hour at altitude, fast enough to intercept V-1s and ambush jets during vulnerable phases. Major George Bostwick of the 63rd FS downed 2 Me-262s in March 1945, stressing the same lesson. They're faster, but they can't take punishment. One good burst and they come apart like paper. Quantity, quality, and speed of replacement. The Luftwaffe's last gamble, Operation Bodenplatte on January 1, 1945, hit Allied airfields hard. At Y-34, Metz, German strikes burned 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured German pilot taunted at the U.S. command post, pointing at the flames. "What do you think of that?" Major George Brookings pointed to crews already clearing wrecks and grading pads. "By tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones. How long to replace your pilots?" Within 48 hours, the line was refilled with factory-fresh P-47D-40s ferried from England. Luftwaffe losses that day, over 270 aircraft and 200-plus pilots, irreplaceable veterans. The Americans replaced their losses in a week. Behind that resilience was staggering production. 15,683 P-47s were built, more than any other U.S. fighter. At peak, Republic's Farmingdale plant completed 1 Thunderbolt per hour, while Evansville, Indiana turned out 500 a month. Each airplane needed 65,000 parts, 8 miles of wiring, and an engine with 2,400 precision components, yet American factories, staffed largely by newly trained workers, many women, met and exceeded wartime standards. Ammo output was just as shocking. A P-47 sortie burned through 3,400 rounds. By mid-1944, U.S. plants were shipping tens of millions of .50 caliber rounds monthly. Fuel? The 9th Air Force alone was drinking over 25 million gallons a month by late 1944. Training told the same story. By 1944, the U.S. graduated around 30,000 pilots a year. A new P-47 pilot often had 400-plus hours, including advanced fighter time and live-fire gunnery. Late-war German pilots sometimes reached combat with under 100 hours total. The difference showed. From mockery to fear, documented in German files. German assessments captured in 1945 show the full reversal. April 1943, large, unmaneuverable, minimal threat except in dives. December 1943, exceptional at high altitude, strong structure, growing firepower, significant threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944, dominant fighter bomber, devastating firepower, extremely hard to shoot down, critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945, best fighter bomber of the war, unmatched mix of durability, performance and pilot quality, direct engagements unsustainable. Even frontline aces changed their tune. Gunther Rall, 275 victories, recalled being badly wounded by P-47s on March 6, 1944, then later admitting the reality, they came down like an avalanche, solid streams of fire. Joseph Pips Priller, who'd once mocked the P-47, later conceded, they carry bombs like a bomber, fire rockets like artillery and still fight like a fighter. D-Day to war's end, the scoreboard. By the end, the numbers were beyond dispute. In Europe, 3,752 German aircraft shot down in the air, 3,315 destroyed on the ground. On transport and armor, tens of thousands of trucks, rail cars and thousands of locomotives and armored vehicles wrecked. In the Pacific, hundreds of Japanese aircraft downed and countless vehicles and vessels destroyed. The 9th Air Force, mostly P-47 units, flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds, and launched 60,000 rockets, while keeping one of the lowest loss rates among Allied fighter bombers. Thunderbolt units posted about a 4.6 to 1 air-to-air kill ratio. Behind the figures were people. The Luftwaffe lost tens of thousands of pilots in the West, many to concentrated .50 caliber fire. By war's end, an average German newcomer might have under 30 combat hours. The average P-47 pilot had 200 plus. Why the .50s worked? Some still argue the P-47 won by quantity, not quality, that German cannon were superior. Gun camera analysis told a different story. Yes, a 20mm shell hit hard, but ammo was limited and aim had to be perfect. The P-47's 8 Brownings created a probability cloud, dense enough that even with imperfect deflection, dozens of rounds hit in a 1 to 2 second burst. U.S. armor-piercing incendiary ammunition often penetrated before igniting, burning hot enough to set aluminum and fuel alight. German shells could produce spectacular flashes that sometimes looked worse than they actually were. And the airplane itself? It was overbuilt on purpose, wing spars rated far beyond load, armor where it mattered, duplicated control cables, heated guns, boosted feeds to prevent jams and adjustable convergence to match each pilot's style. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. The verdict, even from the other side. Years later, at a 1985 reunion in Arizona, General Adolf Galland, the former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, summed it up. We laughed in 1943. We were wrong. The Americans didn't build a European fighter, they built an American one, designed for production, firepower, and survivability. In a war of attrition, the machine that can take punishment and deliver devastating fire wins. They built over 15,000 of them while fighting a two-ocean war. We never had a chance. At the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D sits with a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 coming apart under .50 caliber fire. A captured German quote nearby reads, "We laughed when we first saw them, fat, ugly fighters that couldn't turn or climb. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to. They just pointed those guns and you ceased to exist." The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as a joke and ended the war as a force of annihilation. Between those points, 8 Brownings rewrote air combat, and the laughter died in the storm of lead.